Manhattan, New York City. December 2023. The cold cut through the steel canyons of Fifth Avenue like a blade, turning breath into clouds and coating the sidewalks with a thin layer of frost that sparkled under the streetlights. It was the kind of evening when people walked faster, heads down, collars up, thinking only of warm apartments and hot drinks waiting at journey's end. Victoria Chen moved through the crowd with the same purposeful stride that had carried her through boardrooms and hostile takeovers for the past 15 years. At 42, she was the youngest CEO in the history of Meridian Technologies, a woman whose name appeared regularly in Forbes and whose decisions could move markets. Her charcoal coat was cashmere, her heels Italian leather, and the phone pressed to her ear was discussing a merger that would reshape the telecommunications industry. She barely noticed the man at first. He was just another shadow among the building facades, another unfortunate soul wrapped in layers of ragged clothing, sitting against the marble exterior of a bank that had probably foreclosed on 1,000 dreams. New York had thousands like him. She'd trained herself not to see them years ago, the same way she trained herself not to feel the small pinpricks of conscience that came with laying off entire departments or shutting down factories in towns that depended on them. Business was business. Survival of the fittest. She believed that with the same certainty she believed the sun would rise. But something made her glance down as she passed. Perhaps it was the way his hand extended, not aggressively, not even hopefully, but with a strange sort of resignation. Perhaps it was the photograph he held. Victoria stopped. The executive on the other end of the phone was mid-sentence about shareholder value, but she lowered the device slowly, her eyes fixed on the worn, creased image in the homeless man's weathered fingers. The world seemed to contract to that single moment, that single image. It was impossible. Absolutely impossible. The photograph showed a young couple, no more than 25 years old, standing in front of a modest house with peeling paint and a garden that had been tended with more love than skill. The woman in the picture was pregnant, one hand resting on her swollen belly, the other intertwined with the man beside her. They were both smiling with the kind of unguarded joy that belongs only to people who haven't yet learned how cruel the world can be. Victoria knew that photograph. She knew it because she had seen it 1,000 times in her childhood, sitting on her mother's nightstand in a cheap plastic frame. She knew it because the woman in that photograph was her mother, 30 years younger, and the man was someone Victoria had never known, had never been allowed to ask about, had learned to stop wondering about by the time she turned 12. The man holding the photograph looked up at her. His eyes were blue, though clouded with cataracts and age. His face was a map of hard years, weather-beaten and worn, but there was something in the bone structure, something in the shape of his jaw that made Victoria's breath catch in her throat. "Please," he said, his voice hoarse from disuse or cold or both. "Do you have anything? Anything at all?" Victoria's phone slipped from her hand. It clattered on the concrete, the screen cracking in a spiderweb pattern, but she didn't notice. She was staring at this man, this stranger, this impossible ghost, and her mind was racing through decades of memories and questions and carefully constructed walls. "Where did you get that?" Her voice came out sharper than she intended, almost accusatory. The man blinked, confused. He looked down at the photograph as if seeing it for the first time. "This? It's mine. It's all I have left. Who are you?" He studied her face, and something shifted in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or maybe just wishful thinking reflected back at him. "Who's asking?" Victoria's heart was pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. She crouched down, her expensive coat brushing against the dirty sidewalk, her face level with his. Up close, she could see the fine network of broken capillaries across his cheeks, the gaps where teeth had been lost, the way his hands trembled slightly even when he tried to hold them still. "The woman in that photograph," Victoria said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her name was Linda Chen. She died 3 years ago. Cancer." The man's face crumpled. Not with surprise, but with a grief so profound it seemed to age him another decade in the space of a heartbeat. He closed his eyes, and a single tear tracked down through the grime on his cheek. Linda, he said, and the way he said it, with such tenderness and such loss, told Victoria everything she needed to know. You're James Sullivan. It wasn't a question. He opened his eyes, looked at her with something between hope and fear. How do you know that name? Because she told me about you. Once. Only once, and then she made me promise never to ask again. Victoria felt something inside her chest loosening, some tightly wound coil she hadn't even known was there. She told me my father's name was James Sullivan, and that he'd left before I was born, and that he was never coming back. The man, James, her father, made a sound that was half laugh, half sob. She told you I left. Didn't you? No. He shook his head violently, his whole body trembling now. No, no, no. I was taken. There was a mistake, a terrible mistake. They said I robbed a convenience store. They said I had a gun. I didn't, I swear to God I didn't, but they found me guilty anyway. Poor kid with a public defender against a system that just wanted to close the case. I got 15 years. Victoria sat back on her heels, the cold from the concrete seeping through her coat. That's not possible. She would have told me. She would have visited you. I wrote her every week for the first year. James was staring at the photograph now, not at her. Every single week. I told her I was innocent. I told her I loved her. I told her to wait for me, that we'd get through this, that I'd prove I didn't do it. He swallowed hard. The letters all came back. Return to sender. I thought maybe her family had made her move, made her change her address. They never liked me. Her father said I was trash, said I'd never amount to anything, said his daughter deserved better than some dropout with no prospects. My grandfather died when I was 5. I didn't know that. James looked at her again, really looked at her, and she could see him searching her face for traces of the woman he'd loved. When I got out, I tried to find her. But I had nothing. No job, no money, no place to live. I had a record. Nobody would hire me. I lived in shelters, slept on the streets, did what I had to do to survive. By the time I found her address, years later, she was gone. The neighbors said she'd moved to California with her daughter. I never had the money to follow. Victoria felt something wet on her cheeks and realized she was crying. She couldn't remember the last time she'd cried. Not at her mother's funeral. Not when her first company went under. Not when her ex-husband told her he was leaving because he couldn't compete with her career. She'd built an empire on the foundation of never showing weakness, never letting emotion cloud judgment, never looking back at the wreckage left in her wake. She raised me alone, Victoria heard herself saying. Worked 3 jobs. We lived in a 1-bedroom apartment in San Diego until I was 16. She never dated, never remarried. She told me she'd loved someone once, but destiny had taken him away, and real love only came once in a lifetime. James was crying openly now, tears streaming down his face. I looked for you both. For years, whenever I could. I kept this picture because it was all I had left of the life I should have had. The life I wanted. I'd look at it and imagine what your life was like, what kind of person you became. I hoped, God, I hoped you were happy. That you had everything I couldn't give you. Around them, the city continued its relentless motion. People rushed past, their faces buried in phones or turned away from the uncomfortable scene of a businesswoman kneeling beside a homeless man. The lights of Christmas decorations twinkled in store windows, promising joy and magic and all the things money could buy. Victoria thought about her life, the gleaming office on the 47th floor, the penthouse apartment with a view of Central Park, the closet full of designer clothes, the garage with 3 cars she barely drove. She thought about the emptiness of it all, the way success had turned out to be just another word for loneliness. She thought about her mother, working herself to death to give her daughter every opportunity, carrying the weight of a secret grief that must have crushed her a little more each day. She never knew, Victoria said. She died thinking you'd abandoned us. I'm sorry. James's voice broke. I'm so sorry. If I could go back, if I could change any of it, I would. I'd take the deal they offered. I'd plead guilty to something I didn't do if it meant getting out sooner, if it meant finding her, finding you. But I was young and stupid and I thought the truth mattered. I thought justice was real. Victoria reached out and took the photograph from his hands. Their fingers touched, his so cold they felt almost lifeless. She looked down at the image of her parents, so young, so full of hope, and felt the weight of all the years that had been stolen from them, from her, from all of them. What happened to the conviction? James shrugged, a gesture so defeated it hurt to watch. DNA evidence cleared me. 8 years in, they found the real guy. He'd done a string of robberies with the same MO. They let me go, gave me $200 and a bus ticket, and told me good luck. No apology. No compensation. Just, sorry about those years we took from you. And then I tried to rebuild. But how do you rebuild when you've lost everything? When you've got gaps in your work history that no employer wants to hear about? When every job application asks if you've been convicted of a felony, and even though you were exonerated, the arrest record never really goes away? He laughed bitterly. I went from shelter to shelter. Lost my ID, lost what little I had. Ended up here, on these streets. Been here for, I don't know. 5 years? 6. Time stops meaning much after a while. Victoria stood up slowly, her mind racing. She was good at solving problems. That's what had made her successful. She could see complex systems, identify inefficiencies, restructure and optimize. But standing here, looking at her father, she realized that some problems couldn't be solved with spreadsheets and strategic plans. Some damage went too deep. But that didn't mean she couldn't try. Come with me, she said. James looked up at her, confusion written across his face. What? Come with me. Victoria held out her hand. Please. I don't understand. Neither do I, not completely. But I know that destiny brought you to this corner tonight. I know that it brought me past you at exactly this moment. And I know that I've spent my whole life running from something I didn't even understand, and I'm tired. I'm so tired. James stared at her outstretched hand as if it might disappear if he reached for it. You don't want me. You don't know me. I'm nobody. I'm nothing. You're my father. The words felt strange in her mouth, unfamiliar, like a language she'd never learned to speak. And I'm Victoria. Victoria Chin Sullivan. My mother gave me your last name. She said it was the one thing she could give me from you. Something broke in James's face, some last wall of protection he'd built around himself. He reached up and took her hand, and Victoria pulled him to his feet. He swayed for a moment, unsteady, and she steadied him, surprised by how light he felt, how fragile. I don't have anywhere to take you, he said. I don't have anything. I have enough for both of us. Victoria picked up her broken phone from the ground. Come on. There's a hotel 2 blocks from here. We're going to get you a room, get you cleaned up, get you warm. And then we're going to figure out what comes next. They walked together through the Manhattan evening, an unlikely pair that drew stares and whispers. Victoria was acutely aware of how they must look, the polished CEO and the homeless man, but for once in her life, she didn't care what people thought. She kept her hand on her father's arm, steadying him when he stumbled on the icy sidewalk, slowing her pace to match his shuffling gait. At the hotel, the doorman moved to intercept them, but Victoria fixed him with a look that had made grown men quail in boardrooms. He's with me. The concierge was more diplomatic, but Victoria could see the calculations happening behind his professional smile. Ms. Chen, welcome back. Will you be requiring an additional room? The best suite you have available. Put it on my account. Of course. And for your, guest, would you like us to arrange any services? Everything. Clothes, toiletries, a doctor to check him over. Food from the restaurant, whatever he wants. And I want it done discreetly and with dignity. Am I understood? Perfectly, Ms. Chen. 2 hours later, Victoria sat in the living room of the suite, staring out at the glittering cityscape while her father showered in the marble bathroom. She'd called her assistant and cancelled all her meetings for the next 3 days. She'd called her lawyer and asked him to start looking into her father's case. She'd called the best private investigator in New York and told him she needed a full background check and case review by morning. And then she'd sat down and let herself feel everything she'd been holding back since that moment on the sidewalk. The grief for her mother, who'd lived and died believing herself abandoned. The anger at a system that had stolen years from an innocent man and then discarded him like trash. The confusion about her own life, her own choices, the walls she'd built around her heart in imitation of a mother who'd been protecting a wound that never healed. When James finally emerged from the bathroom, he looked like a different person. The hotel staff had provided him with a robe and slippers, and he'd shaved away the scraggly beard. Victoria could see her own face in his, the same high cheekbones, the same stubborn set to the jaw, the same eyes that could look stern but held unexpected depths of feeling. "I don't know how to thank you," he said, standing awkwardly in the doorway. "Sit down. Please." Victoria gestured to the chair across from her. "We need to talk." He sat, moving carefully, as if afraid he might break something. "I know what you must think of me." "You don't know anything about what I think." Victoria leaned forward. "I need to understand. I need to know everything. What happened that night you were arrested? Who were you before all this? What did you want to be?" So he told her. He told her about growing up in Queens, the son of a factory worker and a home health aide. He told her about dropping out of high school to help support his family when his father got sick, how he'd worked construction jobs and saved every penny. He told her about meeting Linda at a diner where she waitressed, how she'd smiled at him and he'd known, just known, that she was the one. He told her about the night the police kicked in his door, how they'd dragged him out of bed and thrown him against the wall. How the victim of the robbery had picked him out of a lineup, certain he was the one, even though James had been home that night with Linda. How his own lawyer had advised him to take a plea deal, but he'd refused, certain that the truth would set him free. "I was an idiot," James said. "I believed in the system. I believed that if I was innocent, I'd be found innocent. I didn't understand that justice isn't about truth. It's about stories, about who can tell the most convincing story. And a poor kid with no education can't compete with prosecutors who make 6 figures and have conviction rates to protect." Victoria listened, and with every word, she felt something shifting inside her. She thought about all the times she'd looked at homeless people and assumed they'd made bad choices, that they were where they were because of their own failures. She thought about the shareholders she'd enriched by cutting costs, which often meant cutting people. She thought about the system she'd climbed to the top of, never questioning whether that system itself might be broken. "Tell me about her," James said suddenly. "Tell me about Linda. Tell me about my daughter." So Victoria told him. She told him about her mother's fierce determination, her endless work ethic, her quiet strength. She told him about growing up in modest circumstances but never feeling poor because her mother made everything into an adventure. She told him about winning scholarships, about business school, about clawing her way up the corporate ladder with a hunger that might have been inherited from her mother's survival instincts. "She was proud of you," James said. "I know she was. I don't know if she was. I think maybe I disappointed her." Victoria felt her throat tighten. "I became so focused on success, on never being poor again, on never being vulnerable. I forgot how to be human. When she got sick, I bought her the best care money could buy, but I barely visited. I was too busy closing deals, making money, building an empire. And for what? So I could live alone in a penthouse and have no one to share it with. You're young. You have time to change. I'm 42. Halfway through my life, probably. And I've wasted so much of it chasing things that don't matter. James reached across the space between them and took her hand, the same way she'd taken his on the street. His grip was stronger now, warmer. Then don't waste any more. That's all we can do, right? Start from where we are, not from where we wish we were. They talked through the night, filling in the gaps of 37 years. Victoria learned that her father loved classical music, that he'd taught himself to play guitar before prison, that he'd always wanted to be a carpenter, to build things with his hands. James learned that his daughter had a photographic memory, that she spoke 4 languages, that she'd built her company from nothing with a combination of vision and ruthlessness. As dawn broke over the city, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Victoria made a decision. I want to help you, she said. Not just with a hotel room and some clothes. Really help you. Get you housing, get you healthcare, get you whatever you need to rebuild your life. But I need to know if that's what you want. James was quiet for a long moment. Why would you do that? You don't owe me anything. I wasn't there for you. Because destiny put us on the same street corner last night, and I don't believe in wasting second chances. Because my mother never got her second chance, and I can't give that back to her, but maybe I can do this. Because you're my father, and that means something, even if we're strangers. I don't want your charity. It's not charity. It's family. There's a difference. Over the following weeks, Victoria threw herself into fixing her father's life with the same intensity she brought to corporate takeovers. She hired the best lawyers to clear his record completely, to sue the city for wrongful imprisonment. She found him an apartment in a building she owned, nothing fancy, but clean and safe. She connected him with therapists and doctors and support groups. But more than that, she spent time with him. She cleared her schedule 2 afternoons a week to just sit with him, to learn who he was, to let him learn who she was. They went to museums and concerts. They cooked meals together in his small kitchen. They looked through old photographs that Victoria had inherited from her mother, piecing together a history that had been fractured by injustice and bad luck. And slowly, Victoria began to change. She started a foundation in her mother's name, focused on criminal justice reform and supporting people who'd been wrongfully convicted. She revised Meridian Technologies' hiring practices to give second chances to people with criminal records. She reached out to the workers whose facilities she'd closed and funded retraining programs. She still ran her company with excellence, but she tempered efficiency with compassion. One evening, 6 months after that December night, Victoria and James stood in the same spot where they'd first met. It was summer now, warm and humid, and the streets were full of people enjoying the long twilight. Do you ever wonder about destiny? Victoria asked. About whether things happen for a reason? James considered the question. I used to be angry about it. All those years taken from me, all the time I lost with you and your mother. I thought destiny was cruel. But now, I don't know. Maybe everything had to happen exactly the way it did to bring us to that moment. Maybe you had to become who you became, and I had to lose everything, for us to find each other when we did. That's either very wise or very convenient, Victoria said with a small smile. Can't it be both? She laughed, a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deep and genuine. I suppose it can. They walked together through the evening crowd, and Victoria thought about the photograph that had changed everything, the one she now kept on her desk at work. Her parents, young and hopeful, frozen in a moment before tragedy struck. She'd had it restored and enlarged, and sometimes, in quiet moments, she'd look at it and think about the people they'd been, the future they'd imagined. That future hadn't happened. The path destiny had laid out for them had been cruel and twisted and unfair. But standing here, with her father's hand in hers, Victoria understood that destiny wasn't a single road. It was a labyrinth, full of dead ends and wrong turns and unexpected passages. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, if you stayed open to possibility, you could find your way back to the people you were meant to find. She thought about her mother, gone now but not forgotten. She hoped, wherever Linda was, she knew that the story didn't end the way she'd feared. That the man she'd loved hadn't abandoned her. That destiny, for all its cruelty, had found a way to bring their daughter and that man together. "Thank you," James said suddenly. "For what?" "For stopping that night. For seeing me. For giving me a reason to believe that it's never too late to come home." Victoria squeezed his hand. "Thank you for holding on to that photograph. For keeping that piece of who you were, even when everything else was gone. It saved both of us, I think." As they walked on through the Manhattan evening, neither of them knew what the future would hold. There would be more challenges, more struggles, more moments when the past threatened to overwhelm the present. But they would face those moments together, two people bound by blood and fate and a single worn photograph that had survived years of loss to bring them home to each other. And in the great indifferent city that had witnessed a million stories of love and loss, theirs became one more tale of how destiny works in mysterious ways, how the threads of fate can be cut but never truly broken, and how sometimes the longest journey is the one that brings us back to where we always belonged. The photograph remained, a testament to what was lost and what was found, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, love endures. And two people who should have known each other from the beginning walked forward into a future they would build together, one day at a time, one moment at a time, letting destiny guide them not toward what should have been, but toward what still could be. In the end, that was enough. More than enough. It was everything.